The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
If there's anything that will make you sound guilty of something, it's talking about the fact that you're sure you could pardon yourself. And that's the latest in this sort of growing comedy of errors that is the Donald Trump presidency. We learned over the weekend that Donald Trump has been talking more and more with his lawyers about who he could pardon. Could he pardon himself, his children, his associates? And as usual, defenders of Trump called the reports about this fake news. Trump aides denied it. And then Donald Trump started tweeting about pardons himself. Yet another instance where Trump de facto confirms the stories that are being called fake news by his defenders and aides. Donald Trump took to Twitter to talk about pardoning, and he says he has all the power when it comes to pardoning, tweeting over the weekend, while all agree the U.S. president has the complete power to pardon. Why think of that when only crime so far is leaks against us? Fake news. Now, the simple explanation of this is he was just commenting for a friend. He just meant, yeah, he could pardon, but these are not questions for anything he's thinking about doing. It's stuff he's thinking about doing for friends. Why think of pardons, he says? Well, clearly he's thinking about them since he's tweeting about pardons at 7 a.m. in the morning on a weekend. When you start talking about pardons, you don't exactly project innocence. And the timing seems to be related to Robert Mueller now expanding the investigation into Donald Trump's personal finances and business dealings. Trump issued this sort of red line statement last week during his interview with the New York Times, where he was asked, if Mueller starts looking into your personal business finances, blah, 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 would that cross a red line? And Trump said, yeah, I think it would. And that seems to have struck a nerve with Donald Trump and panicked him, because that's exactly what Robert Mueller is looking into right now. And not only is Donald Trump talking about pardons, Trump's team, Pat, is now looking into how they might undermine Robert Mueller and cast doubt about his credibility. Again, if you've done nothing wrong, you publicly cooperate with investigations so that they'll end and you can move on. When you start doing opposition research on a prosecutor, things are not going well for you.
I don't think that it's too big of a surprise that he's talking about pardons and maybe even firing the special prosecutor, given the fact that he's fired the previous guy investigating him. And also, if you look at the timing of all of this, I mean, this week, his son-in-law, his former campaign manager are all scheduled to testify to Congress. I mean, you'd have to imagine that damning information could come out of that he would need to pardon them for.
No doubt about it. And the bigger picture that's being painted here is pretty obvious. And asked about pardons, the White House didn't rule out that the president was considering pardons in the Russia investigation. Here is Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the new, and we'll talk about this later as well, White House press secretary, right? I believe She was named replacing Sean Spicer. Take a listen to this.
Can you clarify where the president stands on the issue of pardons? Is he considering pardons for figures in the Russia investigation? And does the president believe that he has the power to pardon himself?
Look, I refer you to the comments that have already been made by the outside counsel in terms of their actions. The president maintains pardon powers like any president would, but there are no announcements or planned announcements on that front whatsoever.
Does that mean power to pardon himself? Does he believe that he has the power to pardon himself?
Like I said, I don't have anything to add beyond what the outside counsel has already stated on that.
6 months in, folks, this is where we are. And in case you care about the specifics, it's not actually clear if the president can pardon himself. It's what we might describe as untested legal waters. And I'm not going to dive in more deeply to that. There's a lot that's been written about whether the president could pardon themselves. For me, the story right now is not about whether Trump could pardon himself. He can't pardon himself from impeachment, and that is a very specific knowledge that we have. The real issue is, if you believe yourself and your associates to be innocent, you don't go on social media and proclaim that you can pardon people. That is what's called panic. And if Donald Trump and his associates are innocent, they're the biggest fools on the planet at this point, Pat, because innocent people constantly lying about meetings with Russia, stupidly hiding so many different contacts, If they didn't do anything wrong, then all of this lying and obfuscation makes no sense at all.
And take a good look at that response by Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the new White House press secretary, because even though she's a lot more tailored and on point than Sean Spicer ever was, we're certainly going to get a lot less information out of her.
Oh, yeah, no doubt about it. And that also is something I want to talk about what we can expect with Anthony Scaramucci directing White House communications, which was more of the major news over the weekend. Major news at the end of last week and over the weekend. Troubled press secretary Sean Spicer resigned from the Donald Trump administration. Why? He says he didn't agree with naming Anthony Scaramucci to the position of White House communications director. I don't believe that this is really why Sean Spicer resigned. The idea that that was the straw that broke the camel's back, I don't know. Whatever works to get you out, apparently. But Spicer's been in a pretty tough situation within the Trump administration since hours into Donald Trump's presidency. And things are already a disaster for Anthony Scaramucci. First, it was discovered that he had a long history of criticizing Donald Trump and of supporting other politicians, including Democrats. Then he started feverishly deleting tweets from his Twitter account to try to clean up his internet history once people said, hey, look at the stuff this guy has tweeted about Trump and about other politicians. And then Scaramucci goes on CNN and admits, basically outs Donald Trump as being a so-called anonymous source that was doubting the intelligence community's conclusions about Russian hacking. This is just the best. He tries to slip this past Jake Tapper. Okay, listen to this.
Somebody said to me yesterday, I won't tell you who, that if the Russians actually hacked this situation and spilled out those emails, you would have never seen it. You would have never had any evidence of them, meaning that they're super confident in their deception skills in hacking.
Yeah.
My point is, all of the information isn't on the table yet. But here's what I know about the president.
Wait, Anthony.
So wait a second. Someone told you that yesterday. That assertion, right? If Russia really did it, we'd never know because they're so good at it. That requires knowledge of many things, right? Technological things, tradecraft, internet security. It's quite a source that Anthony Scaramucci has, right? But Jake Tapper wonders, and rightly so, who's your source on that? Tell us a little bit about that expert. And it turns out that it's Donald Trump himself.
Anthony,
Let me finish.
Well, you're making a lot of assertions here. I don't know who this anonymous person is that said that if the Russians had actually done it, we wouldn't have been able to detect it. But it is the unanimous.
How about it was the president, Jake?
Okay, it's the
I talked to
consensus
him
of the
yesterday.
intelligence community.
He called me from Air Force One,
Yeah.
and he basically said to me, "Hey, this is maybe they did it, maybe they didn't do it, and I'm gonna maintain for you." Hold on a second.
But this is exactly the issue here. We have experts, the U.S. intelligence agencies, unanimous, both Obama appointees and Trump appointees.
Recall that Donald Trump is against the anonymous sourcing of stories. How about it was the president, Jake? Not a very sophisticated way for someone in charge of communications to be communicating with the media. And by the way, here's a previous appearance by Anthony Scaramucci on Fox Business Network talking about Donald Trump.
I'm moving around paper right now, Maria, but that's another hack politician.
You call Donald Trump a hack?
He's a hack
you're
politician.
in
He's
trouble
probably
now.
going to make Elizabeth Warren his vice presidential nominee with comments like that.
Do you think he's a
It's
plant?
anti-American. It's very, very divisive.
You think Donald's a plant?
And I'll tell you who he's going to be president of. You can tell Donald I said this. The Queens County Bullies Association. You got to cut it out now and stop all this crazy rhetoric spinning everybody's head.
Yeah, that's our new director of White House communications. This is an even more bizarre hiring decision than Sean Spicer was to begin with.
Oh, and Trump will never allow Scaramucci to get away with this or forget this. If you remember, Trump didn't really like Spicer because he wasn't tough enough. Even after the inauguration crowd size fiasco,
Yeah.
Trump reprimanded him for not being firm enough for wearing a light-colored suit. Now, that's one thing. To not be loyal to this president is a whole nother, and I think this is an unsustainable relationship.
It seems completely unsustainable. The first 24 hours of this guy being director of White House communications have been an unmitigated disaster. No credibility for any of these people. And this guy, Scaramucci, he could do way more damage than Spicer because Spicer was clueless, but you could tell he was going out there and sort of having to figure out a way to defend the indefensible. Scaramucci's just a flat out live wire and liable to say anything at any point. It's funny that this is going on, but really we should be crying, not laughing. And will it ever start working well for Trump to put these clueless, unqualified people with no sense of judgment whatsoever in these publicly visible positions? This is a guy who we're going to be watching him. We're going to be hearing him now. And he can't control himself. It seems completely beyond his capabilities to even merely control himself. I don't see this lasting too long. That's my view. Send me your thoughts. I'm on Twitter at @DPakman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show, and we'll be back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Matthew Bourbina. Matthew, thank you so much for being a David Pakman Show member. We're mostly funded by members like Matthew, whether you are a viewer, a listener, a podcast listener, or radio listener, or you watch us on DirecTV. You can support the work we do and keep us independent by signing up at davidpakman.com/membership. The coupon code is available. It's iVoted17. We are on the verge of surpassing 1,800 Patreon donors as well. Find out more at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. And never forget, if you shop on Amazon.com, davidpakman.com/Amazon before you shop will make it so that we get a little kickback for everything you buy. This should be the golden era for Democrats, right? Setting themselves up to retake control of the House and Senate from Republicans' big league in 2018, the White House in 2020. This should be a time when Democrats can really take advantage of the bumbling and disastrous policy of the Trump White House, combined with these spineless Republicans, mostly unwilling to speak out against Donald Trump, at least so far. But instead, Democrats have been bumbling themselves, and they're now announcing a totally flaccid new slogan called a better deal. And I guess it's sort of a critique of how Trump talks about making deals, right? They're gonna give you a better deal than what the deal maker himself is giving you. But it just feels totally vacuous, and it already is sort of conceding the concept of deal making to Donald Trump. In saying that they are doing more than just opposing Trump by putting out this plan, the Democrats pick a name that already concedes that it's about deals, and it's sort of a thinly veiled slight at Donald Trump. You're still sort of being just not Trump when you choose a slogan that's directly related to Donald Trump. But fine, that's the sort of language of it. What about the substance? The new slogan is going to target issues like job training programs and renegotiating trade deals, as well as promoting specific spending plans for infrastructure and a $15 minimum wage. I get it, right? Trump did well with one idea, make America great again. Democrats now want to do well with this idea, a better deal. The problem is that you're conceding everything to Donald Trump with this plan. I criticize Democrats for being Republicans light on many issues. On many issues, Democrats are genuinely different than Republicans. But look at the list here. Job training programs. Okay, hard to disagree with job training programs, but Trump has been talking about job training for people without college degrees, who he loves, and now it becomes the Democratic job training program versus the Trump job training program. You're already in the weeds. You've already lost when that's one of the 3 to 4 points that you pick. Renegotiating trade deals. That's a win for Trump. If your relaunch is to pick up on something that Trump has already been bamboozling people about for 18 months, you've lost. Trade deals are obviously important, but people now care about them without knowing a damn thing about them because of how Donald Trump talked about trade deals. It is a loser's battle for Democrats now to get involved in the trade deal game. And now Democrats say, well, we'll renegotiate them. That's exactly what Trump wants to do. Democrats now need to explain, again, in the weeds, how will they renegotiate trade deals better than Trump? You can't win with that. A plan for infrastructure spending. Trump campaigned on that. Yes, it was a total crony capitalist version of infrastructure spending. But again, to win moderates now, you've got to get into the weeds. How will we do infrastructure spending versus how does Trump want to do infrastructure spending? Chuck Schumer is trying to have the right idea on this, but it's pretty lukewarm. He said over the weekend, when you lose to somebody who has 40% popularity, you don't blame other things, Comey, Russia, you blame yourself. So what did we do wrong? People didn't know what we stood for, just that we were against Trump and still believe that. So yeah, okay, Schumer's right. You should be blaming yourself. That's the right instinct. But it's not just that people didn't know what you stood for. You stood for lots of confusing and weak things. Now, in comes Nancy Pelosi. She's way off the mark. Okay, Nancy Pelosi said to The Hill on July 23rd, or according to The Hill on July 23rd, House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi also told the newspaper that Democrats are not looking for a course correction, but rather a presentation correction. No, no, no. Americans are looking for a course correction away from corporate Democrats that on too many issues are indistinguishable from Republicans. Yes, they need a course correction, Pat. Nancy Pelosi is completely wrong here about this.
Yes, and the other problem with this slogan, too, is it just looks like you're going for half measures. I mean, It's a better deal. It's not the best deal. And Democrats have been screwed by this before. I mean, when we talk about the minimum wage, it's never really about making the minimum wage a living wage as it is, let's say $10 is good enough or $12 is good enough. When we talk about healthcare, we just concede this idea of universal healthcare and we settle on maybe the public option. Well, that doesn't work out because you have to negotiate and you find yourself somewhere in the middle. If you seek out a whole loaf of bread, you may get half a loaf of bread. If you just seek out half a loaf of bread, you may not get much.
You might get a slice. You might get just the crust. What should Democrats actually do? Comprehensive united message on healthcare. Okay, top issue according to Gallup's biggest problem poll. It's a very good poll. Take a position like Medicare for all, or take a position on really a robust public option, even though that arguably was too weak a starting point for the Obamacare debate. Something specific that isn't just slightly different than what Republicans are offering. Fix student loans and deal with college costs in some real way. Top issue for voters as of this month is the economy in general, as well as unemployment and jobs. 14% of Americans believe that those two issues together are the most important problem. You've got to do something serious there. Immigration is still cited as a very important issue. It's not totally clear that people are voting on that. People will vote on healthcare. People will vote on the economy. And by the way, the actual top issue, according to Gallup, 19%, dissatisfaction with government and poor leadership. A Trump light slogan about a better deal than Trump will give you is not going to change that. I'm sorry.
You also have to get everyone on the same page when it comes to their talking points. So send out Democratic surrogates, politicians on all the cable news outlets, and have them repeat the same things. That's what Republicans are good at. So, for example, when it comes to this idea of repealing Obamacare, make sure it gets known to the American public that 43,000 people a year will die needlessly if the ACA is repealed.
It's sadly, Pat, not looking great for 2018. I mean, it's like we've barely even started and it's already not looking good. I'm very concerned about this, quote, new direction from Democrats. Why does Donald Trump's approval rating matter? There's many reasons. It helps us understand whether his agenda is resonating with the American people. It tells us not just whether progressives or moderates are abandoning Trump, but it also tells us whether Trump's own base might be abandoning him. It suggests quite a bit about whether other Republican elected officials will start bailing on Donald Trump, which would not be good given the endless scandals that are surrounding him. There's this pretty long list of reasons why Trump's approval rating matters. And in addition to historical context, I told you last week that Trump has the lowest approval rating in the history of approval ratings at the 6-month mark of all presidencies during the polling era. And it was not just one poll that is painting this disastrous picture for Donald Trump. And there's this popular tactic of the right, which is they'll pick one poll that's not as bad for Trump. It's often Rasmussen, and they'll talk only about that one. So it's common to see right-wing websites like Drudge Report say 50% approval for Trump. And then you see, oh, it's just one Rasmussen poll or something like that. That's becoming more and more difficult to do. Last week, Gallup had Trump at 37%, very close to the campaign, to the administration low of 35%, popped up to 39% over the weekend, but it's pretty bad. And disapproval is the key, right? Trump is just short of 60% disapproval, according to Gallup. We've got a new poll from the American Research Group that has Trump's approval at 35%. Even Rasmussen, which is often the one that has Trump higher than all other polls, and they like to talk about how great Trump is doing, they have Trump at a presidency low of 42% in their poll. And the question that we keep coming up on is, what would raise Trump's approval rating? What could raise Trump's approval rating? Would it be a healthcare victory? I don't know. I mean, the political victory of repealing Obamacare and passing their silly bill will lead to tens of millions of people losing healthcare. It's sort of hard to argue that in the medium or long term, that's going to help Trump's approval rating. The tax plan. It's not looking great for the passage of Donald Trump's tax proposal. That wall with Mexico that Mexico would pay for, I mean, that's just laughable. Who's even talking about that right now? And only 36% of Americans even seem interested in that, which is why it's scary that Trump's approval keeps dropping, because the more Trump's approval drops and the further away that some big legislative accomplishment is that might boost his approval rating, it's more likely, Pat, that Trump will become erratic with the military and maybe do something in North Korea. I mean, we know the list of places where Trump might do something. That's why it's scary.
You know, I think those Gallup polls are really telling, because it seems like with those, he just stays around 35, 36, 37%. That's his basement. That's where his base is, and can't really get much higher than that. But you see that his disapproval numbers are going up,
right,
which makes me think that people who are undecided on the president, or we're just going to give him a chance to see how it goes, are not too happy with him, because they see there's really not a long list of accomplishments. What can you point out as the top accomplishment of his administration? Killing the TPP, maybe?
Yeah, which happened 3 months before he even took office. So yeah, I mean, Trump seems to have this base that's behind him. The polls seem to show that for now. The real shock to me from these polls is that more than 1 out of 3 Americans says, I approve of the job Trump is doing. What do you approve of? This is someone who should be polling in the low 20s by now, given how ineffective and scandal-ridden and incompetent he's been. And you can also wonder, what would it take for that base to abandon him? And I know we hear he could shoot people on Fifth Avenue and nothing would happen, but I believe that there are events that could take place which would start to eat away at this apparent floor of roughly 35%. I think tens of millions of people losing health coverage could certainly be one of those things. It is not looking good here at all. And the real concern, a lot of what Trump's doing is reversible. The real concern is that between the Russia investigation getting closer and closer to Trump and his financial dealings and his businesses, et cetera, that he will become erratic and do something like bombing that random runway in Syria, except that it will actually be much, much worse. It can be really easy to see a whole bunch of isolated stories and events and not see them as part of a broader societal, cultural, and governmental move in any particular direction. So I want to put together just a few of the events that have taken place in the last 7 to 10 days to point out to you that we are very quickly moving towards an authoritarian, crony capitalist, corrupt dystopia, more than we already are in anyway. I want to catch you up just on a few of the stories from the last week and think through what all of these stories together mean. Just think about what in the last week has taken place. Donald Trump's re-election campaign is now paying legal fees for his kid out of donor money, okay? Trump's re-election campaign is paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to Trump-owned properties, and this is for the 2020 election. Big money is being made by the president and his family out of political donors' money. Trump's lawyer, Jay Sekulow, was on all 5 Sunday shows yesterday. Total coverage, unified message, same mouthpiece for the government on every one of the 5 major Sunday morning shows. Trump's own Election Integrity Commission is heating up. They televised a lunch late last week talking about how they're going to fix this non-existent problem of in-person voter fraud, all with the goal of further infringing on voter rights. And in addition, House Republicans are looking to defund the Election Assistance Commission, which is the only federal agency that exclusively works to ensure that the voting process is secure. Trump's air war has killed more than 2,000 civilians already. Are you hearing much about that? Not in corporate media. And meanwhile, you've got the White House railing against foreign workers and immigrants, while Trump's own businesses, you might not have heard of this, are filing for visas to bring in foreign workers. The Associated Press reported that the Trump Organization has asked the federal government, which of course Donald Trump is the president, to grant dozens of visas to allow foreign nationals to come work at two of Donald Trump's private clubs in Florida. Publicly, he's against undocumented immigration. He's against foreign workers, blah, 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 blah. And he's asking for special permits through his businesses to bring in foreign workers to, quote, take American jobs. And this is all while Trump creates Made in America Week, which, of course, relates to none of Ivanka Trump's products being manufactured in the United States, most of Donald Trump's apparel not being manufactured in the United States. And at the same time, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is set to shutter the State Department's War Crimes Office, which for 2 decades was there to hold war criminals accountables. At the same time, you've got Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, as we learn more and more about the lies he's told about his Russia connections, putting out a new directive aimed at increasing police seizures of cash and property. And even some Republicans are against this. Rand Paul tweeted, asset forfeiture is an unconstitutional taking of property without trial. It's creeping authoritarianism, Pat. And when you look at all these stories separately, you say, not good, but not a huge scandal. If you put it all together, and this was just 1 week, we have serious creeping authoritarianism in our country.
And even just offhand, I can think of a couple more things to add to that list, which is in that New York Times interview, Donald Trump attacked his own attorney general.
Right.
And he's also been floating this idea of firing the special prosecutor, Robert Mueller.
Sure.
Those are power grabs. I mean, you appoint those people and they are in the executive branch, but they're also quasi-independent organizations there.
Supposedly.
And the idea that he can just, that they owe him something in return, that they owe him his loyalty instead of, loyalty to the American people or the Constitution, that's an authoritarian streak.
And the biggest indicator that this is all really bad is that many of the things I just mentioned to you might not sound like a big deal, when some years ago, any one of the events I just mentioned, all of which took place in the last 7 to 10 days, by the way, would be red alert. Discuss this with us on our Reddit discussion forum, davidpakman.com/REDDIT.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Okay, I've sort of committed to not talking about this too much and just keeping you posted every few weeks about it, but it is really important for me to keep you posted about what's going on with the YouTube adpocalypse, because it's still really affecting us. And at this point, we've settled into really what is a new normal, a new status quo. Quick backstory, March 31st, YouTube, because of some scandalously written corporate media articles alleging that their ad algorithm could not properly prevent ads from showing on racist or hateful content, turned on, they flipped a switch on a new ad algorithm, and we lost 99% of our revenue. And we'll actually put our revenue graph from YouTube up on the screen for people who are watching. Things were cruising right along. We were having a great first quarter, as indicated by the number 1 on your screen. The YouTube ad boycott hits, and we lose 99% of our revenue. You'll see at 0.2 on this graph. We are just hovering above 0, okay? I'm told by YouTube, hey, David, don't worry. This is going to fix itself. It's going to recover. And we did start to see that recovery around the number 3 in our graph. And sadly, at the end of June, at the beginning of July, at the tail end of this graph, revenue fell off of a cliff. And the new normal, there appears to be no indication that this is going to change, period. And other YouTubers are experiencing the same thing. I've spoken to them. We are now earning about 12 to 15%. 12 to 15% of what we once were. This is not a situation that has gone unnoticed. The New York Times in April wrote a piece about how the YouTube ad boycott is crushing the David Pakman Show. Great researched story by Amanda Hess. Wired magazine in May wrote a story. Davey Alba wrote a good story about how this is continuing to affect the David Pakman Show. And this is just the new normal. And this is why we've been talking about, listen, we have a lot of things planned. We have major things planned. We've got a 12 to 15 part miniseries on critical thinking planned for you. We have upcoming long form deep dives, as we're talking about, into the trend of capital liberalism, into the allegations of so-called liberal violence, debunking the idea that socialism has never worked, a big piece on voter fraud and voter suppression. I mean, we've got so much planned because there's so much going on. But the bottom line is it becomes a numbers game at some point, and we just have to make up the lost revenue. So first and foremost, thank you to the thousands of people that have become engaged with the show financially since March 31st. And this includes both members and patrons. I also want to say that we estimate only about 1% of our audience is making any kind of financial contribution to the show. And that's okay, Pat. I've said this time and again. We do this show specifically because many people aren't getting diversity in their media diet, and we want the show to be available for free to everyone. That being said, if we can go from 1% of our audience supporting us financially to 2%, 3%, or on the high end, 4%, we completely eliminate the need for earning a single penny on YouTube, okay? So I have some good news along these lines. First of all, we can receive pledges, donations of as little as $1 a month on Patreon. The address is patreon.com/David Pakman Show. That's patreon.com/David Pakman Show. As you see on the screen, as of an hour ago, we are just 3 patrons short of 1,800. Okay, if we get 3 more patrons, we will be at 1,800 patrons. We want to get up to 2,000 patrons. So if you go to patreon.com/David Pakman Show, in the upper right of the screen, you'll see that red button, become a patron. If you can only do $1 a month, that's more than enough. And genuinely, if everyone in our audience that could do $1 a month did it, the YouTube ad problem is over, okay? We also have membership available to you. If you go to davidpakman.com/membership, you will see that you can pick monthly or yearly memberships. These can be for as little as $6 a month or $60 a year. But if you want a discount, after you hit the red sign up button at davidpakman.com/membership, there's a coupon code field, and you can type in "I voted 17" into that coupon code, and that will give you a 40% discount. So, the good news, Pat, is we are clawing our way up. When we had sort of what we're calling a secondary ad boycott, that hurt us. But we're again just trying to climb our way up. And we can only say thank you to the many people that are now involved with us financially and supporting the show.
Absolutely. When you talk about wanting to grow audience financial participation from 1% to 2% or 3%, I mean, that doesn't seem like too much overall participation. But that would be doubling or tripling the amount of money coming in.
That's exactly right. And that's why when you hear, someone else will contribute, only about 1% of our audience contributes. And if you can be part of getting us to 2 or 3%, you're an independent media hero, to put it lightly. Marijuana decriminalization is coming to New Hampshire. Decriminalization, not legalization. This is HB 640. It's been signed into law by New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu. It will not take effect for 60 days, not everybody realizing that, and it will make New Hampshire the 22nd state to decriminalize marijuana. Now, being decriminalization rather than legalization, it's going to eliminate jail time as a possibility for simple marijuana possession for personal use. It'll make it a ticket, sort of like a speeding ticket. And if you have up to 3/4 of an ounce of marijuana, you will no longer be potentially punished by up to the year in prison and $2,000 fine that you currently are. Instead, it will be a civil violation punishable by a $100 fine for your first or second offense and a $300 fine for a third offense within 3 years of the first offense. This is good, right? This is obviously good. It's still crazy to me, the idea that you would start paying $100 and $200 tickets for having 3/4 of an ounce of marijuana, right?
Sure.
Like, I think because of the status quo in this country, we've been sort of conditioned to say, oh, if you can no longer go to jail, that's a really big thing. it's still nuts that having 3/4 of an ounce of a plant might put you in jail. Would get you a $200 ticket.
Especially when the vast majority of people in New Hampshire agree with legalization, agree with decriminalization.
Yeah.
And, I think what's telling too here is that New Hampshire has been hit hard by the opiate epidemic.
Yes, they have.
So I think there's two natural thoughts that can come out of that when you talk about marijuana. Some people may think, well, we should take this hard stance against all drugs, stop things that could potentially be a gateway into opiates like marijuana would be.
Sure.
But then there's other people who are realizing that you're putting those two things in the same group when they're not one and the same. And if you have a more sensible marijuana policy, you won't have people going into the black market in pursuit of other drugs.
And in fact, we've seen that in places where marijuana has been legalized, you see a decrease in opioid-related overdoses. And from a criminal justice, so opiate aspect is big in New Hampshire. Criminal justice aspect is big as well. In 2012, almost 3,000 people were arrested in New Hampshire for simple possession, the type of possession that now would no longer potentially put you in jail. So that's a really good thing. The next step is full legalization. And it's kind of funny that New Hampshire's motto is live free or die. Very, very libertarian state. They've got all these movements about getting people to move up there for all the freedom and liberty. They're the last state in New England to decriminalize marijuana. And part of this, if you don't live in New England, you might not realize, New England is this weird mix of super progressive, but also more traditionally conservative in the sense of like the Kennedys, the Kennedys rather than Bernie is the way I think about it. And there's a lot of these strange, outdated blue laws about when you can buy alcohol. There's no happy hour in Massachusetts. You can't reduce the price of alcohol.
We did start as a puritanical society after
That's
all.
exactly right. That's exactly right. And people in other parts of the country might not get that. There is still significant opposition to marijuana legalization in many enclaves of different New England states. And obviously in many other states as well, where it's just flat out like, oh, no, decriminalization. No, we want stricter penalties for people caught with marijuana.
You have to understand that it's live free or die when it comes to issues that conservatives all support. So, for example, the right to bear arms.
Right.
But when we talk about like marijuana or abortion, they're not for that.
More
freedom.
of a conversation that they want to have there. Let's not go too crazy with this freedom and liberty stuff. Might not be good. We increasingly do have at minimum 2 countries here in the United States. I talked about my experience recently visiting Pensacola, Florida, which is, to call it the Deep South, I think is the most accurate way to say it. And day to day, the similarities between someone's environment in Massachusetts and in the panhandle of Florida is very different. We speak the same language. We sort of have the same president, although I don't know that everyone would even agree about that. But it's a very, very different situation. And I think that when we see a continued divergence on drug laws and in many other areas of the law, this contrast between the multiple United Stateses of America is going to become much more noticeable. Let's take a break. Tremendous program today, and big breaking news actually to tell you about also, saving it for the end of the show next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Slowly but surely, we're getting more and more denials from Trump associates that are falling apart when it comes to their interactions with Russian actors, diplomats, agents. We've now learned that Jeff Sessions did have conversations with the Russian ambassador Sergei Kislyak about Donald Trump's campaign, at least according to the ambassador himself. First, Jeff Sessions claimed he had no meetings with Russians at all. Then it came out, okay, he had meetings with Russians, but they were very brief hellos. They were not campaign-related meetings. Nothing about the campaign was discussed. We've now learned that Russian ambassador Sergei Kislyak reported 2 different conversations with Jeff Sessions to his superiors, who, of course, was Donald Trump's foreign policy advisor during the campaign. These conversations were intercepted by U.S. intelligence, and they were, again, Kislyak telling his superiors, yes, we've talked about campaign stuff. We've talked about policy-related stuff. One U.S. official said that Jeff Sessions, who, again, remember, Sessions testified that he had no recollection of such an encounter. Kislyak reportedly said that he did have conversations about Russian policy. Sessions has repeatedly said campaign-related issues were not discussed. It was only in my capacity as a U.S. senator that I met with Sergei Kislyak, and Kislyak is saying, oh no, we had conversations about policy related to Russia, and this could lead to even bigger problems for Jeff Sessions as Attorney General. Donald Trump already said a few days ago that if he had known that Sessions was going to recuse himself from anything Russia related, he wouldn't have selected Sessions to be Attorney General in the first place. And now we have to wonder, number one, whether this is going to further push a possible request for Sessions' resignation. And number two, I wonder if Sessions is being deliberately set up to ultimately end up resigning. Now, you might say, well, maybe Kislyak lied to his own superiors. I guess it's possible, right? Kislyak could have lied to his superiors and said, oh, yeah, I talked about policy stuff with Sessions, maybe to try to impress his superiors. Doesn't seem hugely likely to me. You could make the hypothetical that if Kislyak suspected his phone calls with his superiors were being surveilled, or that emails were being surveilled, he could have deliberately lied about this merely to confuse American intelligence. I mean, it's possible, but it doesn't really fit into everything else we've learned about this situation.
Sure, Kislyak could be out there trying to deliberately mislead or brag even. I guess we really don't know when it comes to his own credibility, but what we do know is that Jeff Sessions has no credibility on this matter because he lied about meeting with any Russian officials when he was going through his confirmation process in front of the Senate. He was under oath during that, and I think most people at this point think that he perjured himself, even in a colloquial sense.
Yeah.
We don't know about this.
That's the growing question, which is this perjury, right? And unless Jeff Sessions truly didn't remember, it appears that it would be. But again, how do you prove someone did remember something? It is very difficult, and this is why perjury is a very, very difficult charge to prosecute, which is why it's so rarely even brought forward.
It also seems so obvious that they would talk about the Trump campaign or they would talk about Russian policy. I mean, what are you going to do during that meeting? Just, have pleasantries and discuss Russian adoption for the entire meeting?
It would be shocking if they didn't, right? That's why it's so hard to believe. Do you think, Pat, that Trump could be playing this 4D chess that some people, I don't even know if seriously or jokingly say he sometimes plays, setting up Jeff Sessions to resign because he's not pleased with him, and then I guess he could take further control over the Russia investigation? I don't know.
Maybe so. I thought it was really questionable that Jeff Sessions decided not to resign after that Donald Trump New York Times interview came out and Trump attacked him. But also you talk about four-dimensional chess. It's really not too crazy to talk about four dimensions when Donald Trump doesn't really understand the forward progress of time.
Well, with a lot of things related to what's going on with the Trump administration, many of their assertions only make sense if you believe time does not work in a forward path, right? You would have to have a different conception of how time progresses to make many of these Trump assertions true. We'll see what ultimately happens with Sessions. I don't know. This is going to sound really strange, but it appears that Donald Trump doesn't know the difference between life insurance and health insurance, and mistakenly believes that sometimes health insurance costs only $1 a month. This isn't the most shocking part of that interview that Trump gave last week to the New York Times, but I realized when I was checking out transcripts of the entire thing, Trump doesn't seem to know the difference between health insurance, which covers medical services, and life insurance, which pays beneficiaries when you die. Here's a quote from Donald Trump from this interview, and it is bizarre. Trump said, quote, "So pre-existing conditions are a tough deal because you're basically saying from the moment the insurance, you're 21 years old, you start working and you're paying $12 a year for insurance. And by the time you're 70, you get a nice plan. Here's something where you walk up and say, I want my insurance. It's a very tough deal, but it is something that we're doing a good job of." Okay, so it's almost completely unintelligible, but there's a couple things in there that we can comment on. Trump talks about $12 a year for insurance or $1 a month. It seems he's talking about term life insurance, okay? Sometimes when you watch TV, you'll see these commercials offering term life insurance for $1 a month or some really cheap amount. And in fact, Gerber advertises for life insurance for babies on Fox News for really, really cheap. So maybe Trump actually got this idea from Fox News, didn't realize that life insurance isn't the same thing as health insurance. What Trump is referring to there, saying by the time you're 70, you get a nice plan. Here's something where you walk up and say, I want my insurance. That refers to a product called whole life insurance, which has what's called a cash value. That cash value accrues over time. And eventually, if you're in a whole life plan for a very long time, decades typically, you can cash in the policy for quite a bit of money relative to what you originally paid in. But also, whole life insurance isn't the type that costs $1 a month. The $1 a month stuff is term life insurance. But the bigger picture is term life insurance and whole life insurance. Neither is health insurance, which is what Donald Trump seems to be confused about. There isn't health insurance for $1 a month in the market. The Kaiser Family Foundation estimates that the average American yearly premium for a sort of middle of the road individual plan offered through the Obamacare exchanges in 2016 was about $4,500 per year, or just under $400 a month. This is red alert level incompetence, Pat. The person who ran a presidential campaign claiming that he would fix healthcare for the entire country doesn't realize the difference between term life insurance he sees advertised on TV and health insurance.
I guess you do have to give him a pass, though, because Donald Trump just recently found out that healthcare is a complicated issue. It doesn't make too much sense to me. How could you, even if you're in your billionaire bubble, think that healthcare could cost someone only $12 a year when it's the top reason for bankruptcies in the United States, when we're having such a vigorous debate over this, and when people are going to needlessly die if the ACA was repealed? There's just no way.
What occurred to me was, if you're Trump and you're this billionaire, right, and you've been eating out of a silver spoon your entire life, maybe for you, you don't even understand, like, maybe $12 a year and $4,500 a year to Trump are basically the same thing. Yep. Like, for him, it's like, oh, yeah, people are up in arms because it's a lot of money for them. And maybe to Trump, hearing that something is $12 a year sounds like not very much. And hearing that something is $4,500 a year also doesn't sound like very much. And he just genuinely has no idea what this stuff costs.
Still, though, I think you understand that if the minimum wage is $7.25 in the entire country, then people can afford health insurance for the entire year over just a couple hours of work.
I know.
It's ridiculous.
If you were Trump and you thought people could get health insurance for $1 a month, you'd probably be wondering why this entire debate is even such a big debate, which might explain why he doesn't seem to care about it and it hasn't happened, and he just seems to offhandedly say, oh, we'll just do this or we'll do that. It doesn't really matter in the end.
It makes me think that Donald Trump was not involved in the entire healthcare process as he claimed.
Yeah, I think that is suspect to say that he's been involved all the way when he came. How are you involved in the creation of something like the American Health Care Act, to whatever degree he was involved, and even if it was just meetings with senators and members of the House of Representatives, and end up thinking that you might be able to get health care for $12 a year? I mean, it just does not compute to me. And what we really have to think about is all those declarations Trump made about health care, like the infamous Leslie Stahl 60 Minutes interview when he talked about all the things he was going to do. He might have been talking about life insurance the entire time. All of those comments might never have been about health insurance. They might always have been about life insurance. I guess at this point, we don't really know. We've got a voicemail number. It is 219-2-DAVID-P. You can call any time of day. Here's what one caller had to say.
Do you feel that you and other progressive hosts understand other parts of America that aren't on the coast?
Okay, I think that's it. I kind of just mentioned this, right? Which is we really do have multiple Americas in the United States. And I do think it is difficult if you spend most of your time on the coasts in Los Angeles, San Francisco, here in Boston, New York City, whatever. It probably is difficult to immediately and fully understand what life is like in a lot of the United States. Now, certainly traveling to those places with some frequency is a useful thing. I feel like I learned a lot about the United States through my travels to Pensacola and Wisconsin and a lot of different parts of the United States. So I think that's an important thing. I do think you can learn a lot about what life is like for people in different parts of the country by reading. I don't think that there's any doubt about that. But I think you're bringing up a fair point, which is we do have at minimum 2, and according to some, as many as 9 or 10 different sort of mini countries in the United States, groups of states. If you look at Europe, for example, and the size of Europe and the size of European countries and how much life changes even within those small countries, never mind across those countries, there's a lot of different life being lived in the United States when it comes to the different regions. So I think I make a concerted effort to understand what life is like for Americans in different parts of the United States. But I think that it would be very useful for all hosts, progressive, conservative, in cities in the middle of the country, to be exposed to as much of this country as possible. Why not?
Even co-hosts.
Even co-hosts should, absolutely. And well, okay, I think Pat wants to talk now about his upcoming plans, but we'll do that a little bit closer to the vacation, because I think that is an interesting story for people. Okay, we've got a great bonus show for you today, including an active ingredient in coffee that is the same as the active ingredient in Viagra. This might be the infamous Cobfefi that we've heard so much about. It's coffee plus Viagra is Cobfefi. We'll talk about that and more on today's bonus show. Please do become a member at davidpakman.com/membership. Speak to you then.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.